This is a report from Reuters as being repeated by the Kiev Independent, which I always got to give a shout out to. U.S. Envoy Witkoff, he is our Middle East peace envoy, who has also become the de facto middleman between Trump and the Kremlin, their White House and the Kremlin. And he has made travel over to Russia and, to negotiate some solution is the idea. But he has gone on Tucker Carlson's podcast and showed himself to be, I don't know how to put this outside of completely uninformed about the war. Let me just throw this out there. He, while trying to talk to Tucker Carlson about finding a peace deal, that means, really putting an end to this war and stopping the Russians from, reigniting the war. We're trying to take this semi-seriously. He's talking about a possible solution. He talks about the referendums that were done in occupied territory as if they had some legitimacy, before then going on to say there was 4 regions that they had to give up. And they said Donbass and then like the rest of them. And they didn't know how to name the rest of them. Now, to be clear, Donbass isn't even a region. Donbass is an accumulation of 2 regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. It'd be like calling it the Virginias or the Carolinas, right? That's not a state. The Carolinas isn't a state. The Virginias isn't a state, right? It's a conglomeration, right? But he didn't know that, and he couldn't name Donetsk. He couldn't name Luhansk. He couldn't name Zaporizhia. He couldn't name Kherson. But he was talking about it as a possible legitimate pathway to end the war, as if, this is something that should be done. And then they talked about the language divides and all of, the ideas, they speak Russian. So when you think about it,
occurred.
And
D. Leary got a tier 2 subscription.
oh, thank you. So when I listen to these talking points, some of them, it's, oh gosh, it's that again, they speak Russian, therefore they're Russian, which we've talked about on the channel before. But just because you speak Russian doesn't mean you're Russian. A lot of people in Kharkiv, the vast majority of people in Kharkiv speak Russian. They do not want to be part of Russia. Just because you speak Russian does not mean the Russians own you. It's not how it works. But this was something that was being repeated from his mouth. I'm used to that nonsense. That's been happening since before the invasion. Him not being able to name the regions he's talking about conceding to the Russians, that's concerning. Imagine somebody's trying to negotiate, a borderline in Korea. You're trying to negotiate an end, and you're like, so you've got the Korea part, and we're negotiating over that area, the Korea area. And you're the top middleman. You're the person that's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And half the time he sounds like Russia Today on that Tucker Carlson show. Why he's even on Tucker Carlson, considering what Tucker has done for Russian propaganda, is already concerning. But the things he's saying on it is even more concerning. Well, once again, Steve Witkoff has opened his mouth, not as part of the Signal scandal that he was also looped into, as people were concerned that he accessed Signal while within Russia, considering that the Pentagon has released reports saying that, hey, Signal has one major security failure, Russia, and accessing it. But he says that didn't happen, so I guess we'll just take him at his word, and we'll just go on and hope and pray and, live on a prayer, so to speak. He has opened his mouth once again. And this is what he had to say. He proposed that Russia, as one of the fastest way to end the war, as if that's a good thing, is to give Russia the 4 regions that he could not name: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Now we're going to read a little bit about this, and we're going to talk about the implications, because it's worse than you think. If you think about what it would mean if a war happened again. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff told President Donald Trump that giving Moscow ownership of 4 occupied Ukrainian regions would be the fastest way to achieve a ceasefire. Reuters reported on April 11th, citing 2 unnamed U.S. officials and 5 undisclosed sources. Now, let's be clear. The fastest way to achieve a ceasefire. I don't want to get too caught up yet because we still got to finish reading it. But ceasefire does not mean peace deal, meaning we could be making if this was done, if we did this, and Steve Witkoff talked about this on Tucker Carlson's show as if it was a real possibility. If we did this, it would not be for peace. It would just be to start negotiations. He said the war would be done before he was in office. Then he said it would be done in 24 hours. Then he said 100 days. 100 days is about to pass by. And now, just to get negotiations started, after conceding troops in Ukraine, after conceding no NATO membership for Ukraine, after Germany stopped being a holdout for Ukrainian NATO membership, it's now the United States. Congratulations, America.
Kazium got a tier 4 subscription.
Oh my goodness.
Check your DMs on Discord after stream. I want to save you from the tinnitus.
See, people heard that I got the ringing in my ears recently, and now they're tier 4ing. Maybe I should talk about my favorite note, which just so happens to be the note that's ringing in my ear. Thank you for the tier 4. I really do appreciate that. Where were we? Oh yes, we're conceding so much. Ukraine not being at the table, which was a massive, inconceivable concession just a year ago. And it's all already been given up. It's all already been given up. That's not even the talk about the ceasefire failures, the hours after Trump signed them, the Russians agreeing to one thing in private and then saying something totally different in public twice now. Old Molotov-style diplomatic pressure, just the restating of the position. Restatement, continuing to make the Trump administration cave. At some point, you need pressure. And while he keeps talking about sanctions, where are the sanctions? Hell, where are the sanctions? Where are the tariffs? Anyway, after all that, one of the options given before the president is seriously saying, for ceasefire, giving up these regions. Let's keep reading, because I was just wanting to clarify ceasefire. According to Reuters, Witkoff conveyed this proposal to U.S. President Donald Trump after meeting with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev in Washington in early April. So basically, Dmitriev came to the United States. It was the first high-profile meeting of a Russian official in Washington. And he came, and this is apparently what was conveyed to Witkoff. So Witkoff is basically just telling Trump, this is their demands. This is the fastest way to end the war, as in, this is their demands. And then it just translates immediately into, this is the fastest way to end the war. But let's be clear, fastest way to end the war does not necessarily translate into fastest way to stop another one. The news came as Witkoff met Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg to discuss a possible path towards a settlement in Ukraine. According to Reuters sources, Trump administration's officials are increasingly divided on how to break the deadlock in Russia's war against Ukraine, with Witkoff and U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg disagreeing on the best course forward.
Are the tariffs really so bad? We just saw the largest market increases in 20-plus years. Some say we might hit peak GDP with these tariffs. Can't possibly go any higher.
I mean, possibly. When you think about it, right, this recovery has been fantastic. Look, okay, people might say that my business is terrible, but my boat used to be at the bottom of the ocean. Now it's at the top of the ocean. We took it out after so that's the highest elevation increase. Look, brilliant market strategies right around the corner. Brilliant market strategies. Continuing. Kellogg has argued that Ukraine would never agree to unilaterally cede total ownership of the territories to Russia, Reuters reported. This is 100% true. This is 100% true. And not only is this 100% true, to ask them to cede territories they still hold on to, including Kherson, where the human safari hunts civilians every day, you're almost asking for a governmental crisis in Kiev. And let me tell you, the government that would come after it would not be one more sympathetic to the nation state that just told them to give up the hunting ground to the hunters. In March, American far-right political commentator Tucker Carlson, on a show with him, Witkoff openly parroted Russian propaganda regarding Ukraine's occupied territories. Witkoff claimed that the majority of people in Ukraine's Russian-occupied territories had participated in referendums and indicated they wanted to be under Russian rule. So treating the staged Russian referendums as legitimate. Witkoff must go, and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio must take his place, according to a March 26 letter from Eric Levine, a major Republican donor cited by Reuters. The letter sent to a group including Republican donors was written after the Carlson interview and criticized Witkoff for praising Putin. So this does indicate that donors, Republican donors, as the party officials have done very little to act, as those who are in elected positions will maybe talk a little bit on social media, but have yet to act against the party. Will it be the donors that make the first move within the Republicans who have some interest about national security and making sure that there's some plan between administrations? Some Republican lawmakers were concerned about Witkoff's pro-Russian stance in the Carlson interview and called Rubio and the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz to complain, according to one of the sources. In the interview, Witkoff referred to the Russian sham vote on the annexation of yada, yada, yada. We already talked about that. We can skip the referendums talk. We already talked about this before on the show. Okay, so thing is, if this pathway was chosen, and it's one thing, okay, we don't know that Witkoff has said this is the best way forward, but from the way he talked about it on Tucker Carlson's show, and the fact that this is being presented to the president not as Russia's offer, but as a pathway, indicates to me that Steve Witkoff takes that seriously. Not as if that's their position, how do we move them off of it, but this is something we could do. Now, Keith Kellogg, for all of my disagreement with him talking about the Ukrainians, like disagreement is to put it lightly, talking about Ukrainians like a barnyard animal that needed to be beaten into submission through aid cuts and, helping the Russians advance. And that's what, the cutting of the aid did, especially the intelligence aid, which, again, cost us nothing. He's right. If you ask the Ukrainians to give up Kherson, where civilians are being hunted, or Zaporizhia, a city of 700,000 people, without a fight, to not only give up these major population centers, but to, in the process, give up the hopes of taking back the territory that is currently occupied, while on top of that, giving up the most defensible positions in the entirety of Ukraine, including a crossing over the Dnieper River, over the strongest natural created barrier by God in Ukraine, the Dnieper River. Just give that up. Let them build a crossing. Let them build logistics. And if a war reignites, their biggest barrier is no longer a barrier. They can march straight from there to Mykolaiv. And then from Mykolaiv, they shoot towards the capital. That's the disaster scenario if the war reignites. After the Russians tried to prevent investment in the meantime in Ukraine's defensive infrastructure and arms industry, which they will certainly do. They will certainly do. In fact, the Russians are getting prepared right now for new offensives. They are. They've drafted the most people in 14 years. They are moving resources into Ukraine for new offensives. You see more pressure in Sumy, more pressure in Kharkiv. And as this is happening, the administration is in no rush to act. Zero rush to act. 24 hours made it seem like they had a rush, but there's no rush. And so not only are these solutions, which the Ukrainians will never accept and sets them up for a disaster war in the future, worse than the one being fought now, but on top of that, on top of this just not being acceptable by the Ukrainians and setting us up for a disaster war, but on top of all of that, that's not the end. This is just the beginning. A reminder that this is to start negotiations. So we would be giving up land. The Russians have also made demands about demilitarization, a bunch of others, but all of this. And then we're in the room so we can talk about the war not continuing. Because could you imagine they give up all of this and then Russia just continues advancing anyway? Imagine that they give up Kherson, Zaporizhia, and it's taken, and it's all these tragedies of people, this mass migration of people moving away from their homes, running away, this trail of tears. And then after that, in a month after negotiations fail, because the Russians demand even more, including demilitarization, which is a demand they still issue, they continue to advance. Will the United States send aid then? Or have the Russians determined that the United States has no taste for continued support at all? And why would they think otherwise if we make this type of concession? Even if that's not the case, why would the Russians think otherwise? And why wouldn't they test us? What's another 3-month, 4-month offensive in the grand scheme of things? We're sleepwalking into a disaster, and the solutions that are being offered is worse than the current situation. Keith Kellogg is right, not about everything, but about this. And the reason he's right is because he has 2 functioning eyeballs and he can name the regions that are being fought over. Not because he's right about everything, but you need to have those basic facts to understand the problems with this. If you can't understand what crossing the Dnieper River would mean for Russian future offensives or possible future war, or what that would mean for Ukrainian politics, what that would mean for the Ukrainian economy, what that would mean for a population already drained, what that would mean for the risk of investment and the lack of confidence that will produce in investors and consumers for the future of the Ukrainian economy. Why would people invest in a country that's primo invasion territory? I hate to put it that way, but if you've already crossed the river, and especially if you've got them demilitarized, why would you spend anything to rebuild anything if it's all going to blow up again? And that freezing of investment, which could also be inspired by sporadic violations of ceasefires, by sporadic violations of the peace deal, Minsk 3, whatever you want to call it, could also deflate investor confidence, future dooming Ukraine's ability to rebuild and reorientate itself and try to, recover from this and be ready in case the Russians attack again, which is a scenario which the Trump administration just refuses to acknowledge, almost like they just, you know what it feels like? Sometimes in war or in life or in business, people make decisions based on what they want to be true. I don't want our competitor to compete with us in this area, so we're going to invest here under the hope that they won't. But you have to be ready for the externality that they do. And you have to be ready for the externality that what Trump acknowledged about Ukraine being the apple of Putin's eye, which Trump said multiple times on the campaign trail. So either he's a liar or it matches up with the general trend many others, myself included, have noticed, and what his essays have pointed to, which he believes that Ukraine is a territory that must be conquered either for historical revisionist reasons, as well as economic reasons and cultural reasons, and what they believe is their national security. And that doesn't stop with Donetsk and Luhansk. That stops with Ukraine being gone or on their side. And until they realize that you need to make it so that pathway is no longer a viable opportunity, until you do that, you're not prepared for all the externalities. Until you add the pressure to make them think, God, we just got to take whatever we can get, then you're just asking them to try to seek out more. Zarin, thank you so much for the 5 gifted tier 1s to Escol, TS the Shadow Wolf. Don't mess with, that's a scary name.